So just in terms of the key information that you're going to need to know, the paper will be an hour and 45 minutes long and will be focused on non-fiction texts, so texts that are based around real events. You will have to complete 5 questions in total. The first 4 questions are reading questions, and then the last question, question 5, is a writing question. I would work with the following timings. I would spend 15 minutes first reading the text. There will be 2 of them. Then I would focus on 5 minutes on question 1, around 10 minutes on question 2, 15 minutes on question 3, 20 minutes on question 4, and it's very important that you leave yourself 40 minutes for question 5 because it's worth half the marks of the paper. So as I mentioned, you will have 2 texts that you have to read, and the text will generally be linked by topic. So we're going to look at these 2 texts today, source A and source B, and both of them focus on the theme of disasters. Now, I would suggest that you read these texts really carefully first before you attempt the question, so you have a general understanding of what the texts are about. So, source A. This is an extract from an essay written in 1967 called The Village That Lost Its Children by Laurie Lee. Aberfan was a small mining village in Wales. In 1966, many of its people, including children at a local school, were killed when heavy rain caused a landslide. The village that lost its children. Few people have ever heard of Aberfan until disaster struck it. It was just another of the small mining villages lying tucked away in the South Wales valleys, a huddle of anonymous terrace houses of uniform ugliness, unrelieved except for chapel and pub. Its heart was the coal pit, and its environment like the others, the debris of a slowly exhausting industry. A disused canal, some decaying rail tracks, a river black as the Styx, a general coating of grime over roofs and gardens, and the hills above blistered with a century of mining waste. Such villages learnt to accept a twilight world where most of the menfolk worked down the pits. Many died early with their lungs full of coal dust, and the life was traditionally grim and perilous. Disaster, in fact, was about the only news that ever came out of the valleys. The sudden explosion underground, miners entombed alive, or the silent death in the dark from gas. Wales and the world were long hardened to such news, but not to what happened in Aberfan. A coal mine sends to the surface more waste than coal, and a mining village has to learn to live with it. It must be put somewhere or the mine would close, and it's too expensive to carry it far. So the tips grow everywhere, straddling the hillsides, nudging the houses like black-furred beasts. Almost everyone from time to time has seen danger in them, but mostly they're endured as a fact of life. On the mountain above Aberfan there were 7 such tips. The evening sun sank early behind them. To some of the younger generation they'd always been there, as though dumped by the hand of God. They could be seen from the school windows immediately below, rising like black pyramids in the western sky. But they were not as solid as they looked. It was known that several had moved in the past, inching ominously down the mountain. What was not known, however, was that the newest tip, number 7, was a killer with a rotten heart. It had begun in Easter 1958 and was built on a mountain spring, most treacherous of all foundations. Gradually, over the years, the fatal seeping of water was turning tip 7 into a mountain of moving muck. Then one morning, out of the mist, the unthinkable happened, and the tip came down on the village. The children of Pantglas Junior School had just arrived in their classrooms and were right in the path of it. They were the first to be hit by the wave of stupefying filth which instantly smothered more than 100 of them. The catastrophe was not only the worst in Wales, but after an event of such wanton and indifferent cruelty, it seemed to put to shame both God and man. So source B. This extract is from a Victorian newspaper article published in October 1863. A minor earthquake had been felt in some parts of Great Britain. We have had an earthquake. The men of science all tell us that we have every right to expect earthquakes. This country lies on the great volcanic belt. There runs under us a huge crack in the earth's crust. Who knows how deep or how wide? A few flimsy strata have fallen in, and now who knows what enormous voids, what huge quantities of imprisoned gas and seas of molten metal there may be only a few miles below this fair surface. The scientists tell us that there are probably many earthquakes which we do not feel, but if a small earthquake, even an imperceptible one, why not an earthquake to destroy a metropolis? But the earth wave has been faint, and only a feeble echo of some distant shock, for it was not everywhere, nor was it everybody that was waked by the earthquake of Tuesday, October 6th. More than half the nation has to accept the word of the rest. Yet many felt that it will never forget the feeling, and many even heard that it will carry the awful sound in the ear to their dying day. In some places it even did damage. It upset furniture and broke crockery, it displaced bricks and even revealed a crack in a wall. We should not be surprised to hear of more serious damage, but if this much, why not more? Britannia's fabled rock has been shaken from its bases. Be it an only inch or two, the ocean throne has been tilted up. Throughout the Midland counties, the earthquake appears to have been felt the most. At Birmingham, walls were seen to move, and people rose from their beds to see what damage had been done. At Edgbaston, successive shocks were plainly felt. Houses were shaken to their foundations. A dreadful rattle was rather felt than heard, and people woke one another to ask the meaning. Everything around was violently agitated. The houses cracked and groaned as if the timbers had been strained. The policeman on duty saw the walls vibrate, heard everything rattle about them, and there were witnesses to the universal terror of the roused sleepers. In London, we are situated on a deep bed of clay, where our houses are well built, and where we're so accustomed to noises, shocks and tremors that we're almost startled to find it calm and quiet. Noises from vast warehouses along the riverbanks, bathed by undergrounds uttering horrible cries and vomiting waves of smoke. London, where men work in darkness, scarcely seeing their own hands and not knowing the meaning of their labour. London, a rainy colossal city smelling of molten metal and of soot, ceaselessly streaming and smoking in the night fog. Fog which persists and assumes different ways, sometimes ashen, sometimes black. With the lighting of the fires, it soon becomes yellow and pungent, irritating the throat and eyes. Here on this day, a large proportion of us felt a sort of shock and shiver, and the feeling of being upheaved, but very few of us could trust our own sensations and be sure it was something out of the usual course. Who can say what strange trial of shaking or upheaving, sinking, dividing, or drying up may await us? We know by science these isles have gone through many a strange metamorphosis, and science cannot assure us that there will not be many more to come. Question 1 will require you to pick 4 true statements. This is a 4-mark question and you will have 5 minutes. You need to make sure that you're referring to the relevant part of the text stated in the question. The statements should appear in the text in chronological order. I would suggest that first you mark off in pencil which ones are true or false, and then when you're confident, shade the circle inside of the box for all of the true statements. So let's have a go at this question. You are looking for, out of the 8 statements you're given, which statements you believe to be true. The correct statements were C, D, F and G. Question 2 is a question that tests your inference skills. It is an 8-mark question and you have around 10 minutes. You will be assessed on your ability to infer, which means reaching a conclusion based on evidence. So let's have a look at what this question might look like. In this question, you'll always be asked to refer to both source A and source B, and they will name a specific area that they want you to focus on. So in this case, they're saying, use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences between Aberfan and London. When approaching this question, start by thinking of the overall answer to the question. So what are the differences between the two places, Aberfan and London? I would then suggest that you select 2 pieces of evidence from each text that support the ideas that you've already formulated. And if you have time, write 2 comparisons, focuses on the difference between the 2 places. You may be asked about differences, you may be asked about similarities. The structure will look something like this. In source A, and then you will talk about your idea about Aberfan, whereas in source B, and you'd write about your idea for London. If you were being asked about similarities, you might say both texts instead of in source A, in source B. Then you'll insert your evidence for source A. So in source A, this can be seen in, this implies that Aberfan is. So you're looking for a piece of evidence where you can make an inference. Whereas in source B, London is presented as in, insert a piece of evidence, this implies, and then if you have time, do that process again for a second idea and different pieces of evidence. Question number 3 is a language analysis question. It is worth 12 marks and you'll have around 15 minutes. You're going to be assessed on your ability to analyse the way that the writer uses language. Now remember, language analysis should be a skill that you're really familiar with. We do language analysis all the time in literature, but we also do a language analysis question in paper 1. So using the same process as you're used to in terms of picking out language that's going to give you lots to say. So for example, the question may look something like this. You now need only to refer to source A from lines 27 to 40. How does the writer use language to describe the coal tips? So you would focus on picking out evidence that suggests to you something about the coal tips. A suggested process that you might follow for this question is, like question 2, you'd first think about an overall idea for the question. So the writer uses language to describe the coal tips as. So what is your overall impression of the coal tips? Avoid using words from the text, just an overall impression you get from the language used. I would suggest that you pick out 2 to 3 pieces of evidence, that implicit evidence that's going to give you lots to say. Think about how the evidence selected can be analysed to support your idea, and it's important that you also identify methods. Now, the structure of the answer might look something like this. So you start with your answer. In the extract, the writer uses language to describe the coal tips as. Then you insert your evidence. Then you identify a method used in that evidence, and a method could be anything from a simile or a metaphor down to a word choice. What's really important is not how many methods you identify, it's what you say about the quotation. And then you would say, this evidence implies, and you would do a thorough analysis of that evidence and how it matches the idea that you said in your first sentence. Try and aim to write about 2 to 3 pieces of evidence, but keep a really close eye on the time and don't go beyond your 15 minutes. Question 4 will require you to compare viewpoints. They might use other words, so it might be viewpoints, perspectives, opinions. It's a 16-mark question, and you'll have around 20 minutes if you've used your time wisely up until this point. And as I said, you'll be assessed on your ability to compare the viewpoints of the writers in both texts. So here's what a question might look like. For this question, you need to refer to the whole of source A together with the whole of source B. So again, it's another question that's going to require you to compare. Compare how the writers convey their different ideas and perspectives of the events that they describe. When attempting this question, kind of similarly to the other questions, start by coming up with some overall ideas. So what do you think, having read through the text, are the writer's viewpoints or perspectives on the events that took place that are being described in the text? I would suggest that you look for a couple of pieces of evidence from each text to support your ideas. The structure, I want you to think about ideas that link to the text. So in source A, the writer's perspective is, whereas in source B. Then insert your evidence for source A, identify a method, and talk about how that evidence suggests the writer's viewpoint. Then you could say similarly in source B or differently in source B, and you would do the same process again. So you would add in your evidence, identify the method, and analyse the evidence, focus on how that presents the writer's particular viewpoint. If you have time with your 20 minutes, try and do 2 comparisons. Question 5 is the most important question on the paper. It is worth 40 marks and it's assessing your writing skills. As it's a 40-mark question, you want to aim to leave yourself 40 minutes. You could be asked to write either a letter, a speech or an article, and you need to make sure you clearly communicate your point of view on the topic outlined in the question. So as an example, here is a question that came up on a past paper. You get given a short statement first, and then you are told what type of text you're being asked to write. So the statement is, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes and landslides. We see more and more reports of environmental disasters affecting the world and its people every day. Write the text of a speech for a debate at your school or college in which you persuade young people to take more responsibility for protecting the environment. So essentially the text that you're being asked to write about is a speech, and a speech that's to be delivered at your school. The aim is that you want to persuade young people to take more responsibility for protecting the environment. Now, as you would have a mixed audience, so it would be students and teachers, you want to make it engaging, but you want to keep a certain level of formality in your writing. Now, you should be familiar with this as kind of a planning grid. You won't have this planning grid in your test, but it kind of gives you an idea of the types of ways in which you will organise your text. So you will start with an introduction. And that introduction will be different depending on the text that you're writing, but what needs to happen in the introduction, regardless of the text, is that your viewpoint on the topic is clearly stated. Think about an engaging way to open the text, perhaps using a rhetorical question, but also consider use of like DeForest techniques and consciously crafted sentence, which are on the 2 slides to follow. Once you've clearly stated your view, your next 3 paragraphs will be you outlining reasons that are fully developed in support of your point of view. And then you want to aim to end your text with a conclusion where you re-emphasise your main points, you call your reader to action, and maybe create a cyclical structure where there's connections between the beginning of your text and the end. When considering the structure of the text, one possible structure that you can use to set up your argument is called the non-fiction 5 S's. So you can see kind of the 5 processes that you can go through, which would outline your 5 paragraphs. So you will start your text by setting up your argument. So what is the issue that you're being asked to talk about, and what do you think? So you're being asked to talk about why people your age need to take more responsibility for the environment, and you make it clear in your introduction like why you think that. To support that, you might create an anecdote, so an anecdote like a short story that helps to highlight the impact the issue is currently having. So you might create an anecdote about a person that is suffering due to the effects of like global warming and climate change. Then for your second paragraph, you can talk about the situation currently. So you need to outline the current situation. So for example, for this question, you would outline the current situation regards climate change and how that's impacting the environment. Then you would lead really nicely into paragraph 3, where you talk about your strongest reasons. What is the strongest reason that you can give your peers to argue that they should be taking more responsibility for the environment? Paragraph 4, you would then consider like the counter argument. So why might people of your age argue back to you that actually it's not their responsibility to take responsibility for saving the environment? You would think about the reason that they might give and think about a way that you can smash that down or shut that down. So you would outline that you understand what their point of view is, but say, here's the reason why I don't agree. And then finally, you end your text by talking about a solution. So how should we solve the problem? Who do you think can help? When should this happen? So it's kind of a call to action. So using this structure gives you an opportunity to use a wide variety of like the DeForest techniques, but the sentence starters, but also gives you a structure that you can memorize and use when you are writing your text for question 5. So the examiner will expect to see some use of DeForest techniques. It's not expected that you will use all. It's expected that you would be selective based on what DeForest technique kind of suits the opinion that you're giving at the time or the reason that you're giving. So a list of possible DeForest techniques you can use are here. One of the things that you're also assessed on is your ability to use a range of sentence types. We often find ourselves starting lots of sentences with I and the, and that becomes boring for your reader. So when you're planning your text, try and think of a few different consciously crafted sentences that you could use within your writing that's going to help show the examiner that you are able to use a range. Hopefully that has given you a quick run through of what to expect from your exam tomorrow. It is your last one. Finish strong, and we have great faith in you, Year 11, so good luck.